Welcome to this panel on protecting migrant rights and saving lives. Looking forward, strengthening advocacy at global, regional and country levels. This session will build on the last to consider how to strengthen advocacy at these levels so that we can move forward, and as the network coordinator was encouraging us yesterday, not just admire the problem, but move forward into how we can work to address these problems together. So we have 3 guiding questions for this session. I'm going to read those out and then introduce each panelist in turn who will address one or more of those questions. So the guiding questions for this session are: how can the network better support partners, states and stakeholders to ensure that migrants' rights are protected and their lives are saved? What measures can we collectively take to encounter the negative trend towards migrants, including as political scapegoats, especially during election campaigns and political cycles more generally? And we heard about that yesterday in terms of the number of people who will have an opportunity to vote this coming year. And finally, how can the network improve speaking in one voice on this issue? So it's my great pleasure to turn first to Refaat Madi, who is the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants. Refaat, you have the floor.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, I'm truly glad to be here today at the 5th meeting of the UN Network on Migration for the first time in my capacity as the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights of Migrants. I'm also glad to participate in the thematic session on protecting migrant rights and saving lives, as to realize the full and effective protection of human rights of migrants is at the core of the mandate entrusted to me by the Human Rights Council. Human rights derive from the inherent dignity of human being. Recognition of this inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of fundamental freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Simply by being human, all people deserve full respect and protection of their human rights. The principle of equality and non-discrimination, among others, are the cornerstone of international human rights law, which stipulated in the 9 core international human rights treaties that apply to all persons, including migrants. Ensuring equality and non-discrimination contributes to reduce disadvantage on numerous grounds and in many areas. Human rights are not reserved for special groups. They are for everyone throughout society and across the globe. Migration has emerged as a prominent priority and policy issue across the globe. Today, there are more than 281 million migrants living outside of their country of origin for various and complex reasons, including those seeking safety, protection, and better life opportunities elsewhere. It has become the center of many public discourses and political agendas, which have sometimes reinforced harmful negative narratives and counterproductive symbolic crackdowns. Unfortunately, we are going to witness more negative narratives this year in light of the coming elections in over 60 countries, yet particularly elections in Europe that are combined with the current European Pact. While states do have legitimate interest in securing their borders, and exercising security control. International law is also clear that repressive policies and practices cannot override the obligation of the state to respect the internationally guaranteed human rights of all migrants. This threatens to put an end to or even reverse progress that has been made towards advancing migrants' rights. There is a need now more than ever for strengthening coordinated action on all levels to combat this phenomenon and protect the full human rights of migrants, regardless of their status, mode of arrival, or any other distinction. More cooperation on migration governance does not mean less territorial sovereignty. International, regional, and bilateral cooperation is essential to transition to an ethical and human rights compliant migration governance. As the playing field must be leveled in order to make progress, no country alone will be able to end exploitative and abusive practices against migrants by themselves. When local, national, regional, and international entities get together, as evidenced by this multilateral engagement in human mobility, it can serve the purpose of initiating and sustaining conversations on migration issues between states, as well as provide unique insights and tools for advocacy on urgent issues, gaps, and shortcomings in the implementation of legal frameworks and objectives pertaining to migrants' human rights and protection needs. Thus, enhanced advocacy would allow for a better sharing of responsibilities on the part of the states associated with this migration. Thus, the Global Compact on Migration is an important framework in this regard. There is a need for more synergy and active commitment working towards GCM objectives at the global, regional, national, and local levels by all states and stakeholders. In my view, all states and stakeholders have three key obligations, of course, among others, that they must abide by all times. Firstly, is the obligation that ensues from human rights and dignity, which is to preserve migrants' lives, well-being, and safety. Secondly, it is to prioritize the work for the sustainable human development of every migrant, to recognize their individual and collective unique personalities, contributions, and participation in host and origin communities. Finally, there must be empathy and compassion when engaging and responding to the protection of migrants' rights and saving their lives, especially in times of difficulty and distress. Every migrant deserves to receive care and assistance adapted to his or her need. Saving lives is at the bottom of human rights protection. The network has been carrying out important work supporting member states and relevant stakeholders to enhance the protection of the human rights of migrants with the aim of reducing vulnerabilities and preventing migrants' death and injuries. I'm glad to see that topics such as missing migrants and the provision of humanitarian assistance to migrants in distress are on top of the agenda of the work of the network. Providing actionable recommendations to member states and relevant stakeholders are very crucial first steps to prevent loss of life. I encourage all relevant members and partners of the network continue their important work in this aspect and assist member states in the implementation of these recommendations. Excuse me. As an independent human rights mechanism, I will continue my exchanges with member states on efforts made to prevent loss of lives, such as enhancing search and rescue operations, strengthening international cooperation in life-saving, humanitarian assistance for migrants in distress on land and sea, combating harassment and violence in the context of border management, among others. Empowering migrants and recognizing their true value not only help to preserve their dignity and protect their human rights, but also promotes their social cohesion and full integration into societies. To counter the negative trend towards migrants, including as political scapegoats, the UN Network on Migration should continue promoting the data collection, research, and dissemination of information on positive contributions migrants bring to their host and origin communities. As my contribution to this collective effort, I have decided to dedicate my first report to the Human Rights Council to providing a human rights-based analysis on migrants' contributions to societies and relevant facilitating and hindering factors. Migrants whose rights are promoted and protected can live and work in safety and dignity, and in turn are better suited to contribute to their host and origin communities. Several countries have demonstrated promising initiatives and measures that recognize and facilitate migrants' positive contribution. I look forward to receiving more inputs in this regard. For more details about my research, I encourage you to consult the call for input on the webpage of my mandate. I call on the states and stakeholders to strengthen and redesign existing migration governance at the local, national, regional, and international levels to tackle inequalities within planetary boundaries and ensure human rights-based, migrant-centric, child-sensitive, gender-responsive, and disability-inclusive approaches toward the realization of human rights of migrants without any distinction. Finally, against this background, I welcome and support initiatives that aim at enhancing collaboration and create synergy between international, regional, and national mechanisms and actors to share knowledge about and act on, intervene, and speak about concerns related to the human rights of migrants in a coordinated and effective manner. I'm very much looking forward to cooperating with you and stand ready to provide technical support and advice to respective states and stakeholders to this endeavor, as well as receiving comments, initiatives, and proposals from you. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Special Rapporteur, and for your presence and commitment to engaging with the UN Migration Network so early in your mandate, and for that really strong reminder of the foundational commitment to the inherent dignity of migrants, the inherent dignity of all of us. I'm going to turn now to Florence Anselmo, who's the head of the Central Tracing Agency at the ICRC France.
Thank you very much, Laurel. Good morning to all of you. I'm the head of the Central Tracing Agency of the ICRC, and I will respond to the question really from the angle of the question of missing migrants and deceased migrants. I'd like to start by answering the first question that ask how the network can better support partners to ensure that migrants' rights are protected and their lives are saved. When thinking of the issue of missing migrants, there are really, I would say, three key ingredients that need to be there to bring about change. The first one is political will. Second one are state capacities that are key, and the third one I would put resources. And I'll try to touch upon that. And so we're discussing advocacy in this session, and I think that at the global level, first, policy and humanitarian diplomacy engagement has been key to raise awareness and to shape state commitments and strengthen and also create this indispensable political will and give visibility. I saw that the first word that came up in the previous session was visibility. And I think when we talk about missing migrants, we are really talking about a double invisibility. Missing persons are invisible and migrants are too often invisible. So bringing attention to the issue has already been key. And the GCM Objective 8 has been instrumental in creating that attention and creating a process whereby actionable recommendations on the issue is more likely to turn political will precisely into concrete actions. So as my colleague from IOM, Federico, highlighted just before in the previous session, the finalization of key recommendations through the network and their inclusion in the SG's report provides a great opportunity to us all to indicate some concrete steps that states should prioritize to make tangible progress in preventing and responding to death and disappearances along migration routes. However, when it comes to moving from committing to actually doing, the regional level becomes crucial. And this is where efforts, I would say more precise efforts to facilitate interstate coordination and cooperation along migration routes must happen to enhance the search and identification of missing migrants, and where peer-to-peer exchanges of good practices can be most fruitful. And of course, action must also be taken at country level, and I would say also at municipal level. And we've heard the gentleman from Sao Paulo just before, to build capacities that need to be built. Capacity of a medical legal system or ways to systematize data collection in a way that makes it more interoperable. So the UN Network on Migration is well placed to support such processes and to ensure that the GCM regional reviews serve to hold states accountable on Objective 8. Now, on the positive side, I think we have seen over the past couple of years more and more examples of global commitment trickling down into regional and sub-regional bodies on the issue of missing migrants. I'll just give a few examples. It includes the Regional Conference on Migration in the Americas, who issued joint recommendations on missing migrants. It includes the 54 states who are part of the Refaat process, who in December of 2022 decided to expand the mandate of the process to missing migrants and to work towards establishing trans-regional coordination channels and share information on missing persons with their families. At a consultation also earlier this week on the draft recommendation that Federico presented during the first session this morning, the Economic Community of West African States confirmed their intention to work towards a missing migrant policy to be adopted at the heads of state level. In Western Africa and in Europe, states began to appoint, and that's really important, to appoint national focal points for missing migrants to facilitate cross-border cooperation. So these are really, really important development that we need to take advantage of. So really, let's work with regional bodies to create effective frameworks for cooperation to prevent and resolve disappearances. Let's also seize opportunities such as the appointment of national focal point to support them in their work, to build their capacities and launch concrete cooperation amongst them. I would say that some tangible progress has also been made at the operational level, for example, to identify deceased migrants. So in the wake of last year's tragic shipwreck off the Greek city of Pylos, 80 deceased migrants were recovered from the sea. And today, Greek authorities, through a collective effort involving the Red Cross movement, Interpol and others, have managed to identify around 80% of these victims from different countries, and more identifications may follow. I just want to remind that these are 80 families, mothers, brothers, sisters, sons and daughters who are going to be able to heal, you know, and to grieve and to know what has happened to their loved one. And this is also an important illustration of how the technical know-how that is at our disposal. And so such multi-stakeholders, you know, at the political level, but also at the technical level, these responses, including the activation of disaster victim identification teams, needs to be promoted and supported by the network. Operationally, we also, I also think that synergies between, you know, what we would call the blue and the red pillar should be taken advantage of. In the movement, we have really an unparalleled network of national societies along migration routes, collaborating across borders on issue of missing persons and separated families. And national societies also work as auxiliaries to their governments. And investing in them, strengthening their work also creates long-term sustainable local capacities to deal with this issue. Now, if I turn to your question, on advocacy and speaking with one voice, and how we can improve this, so, well, I think we actually have become better at doing just that. So I take the joint statement on missing migrant that was issued in the lead up to the IMRF in February of 2022, not only by the heads of the agencies of the UN Network on Migration, but also by the heads of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Federation of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent, and the International Commission on Missing Persons. So this set out a comprehensive set of urgent measures supported by all of us. The recommendations that are now being developed for inclusion in the SG's report will serve to consolidate this common narrative. They must feed not only into our respective advocacy efforts, but into well-coordinated operational initiatives supported by the considerable capacities of the UN Network on Migration members and the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. So the task at hand is really to move from speaking as one to acting as one. And of course, speaking for the Red Cross movement, I need to be very clear that this needs to be done in a way that takes into account our respective mandates and red lines. We are not a group of interchangeable actors, but each have comparative advantages that can be brought to play. So allow me to focus just for a moment on an issue of particular concern in this regard. Over the past few days, a lot of discussions have taken place on the draft recommendations with really great and impressive participation of families of migrants, of states, and of civil society actors. And these discussions really have illustrated the importance to be united in presenting the issue of missing migrants as first and foremost a humanitarian challenge that cannot be solved through a securitization approach. We cannot prevent the issue of missing migrants by preventing migration, put very simply. So there are important objectives in the Global Compact that cover the security and law enforcement angle, but Objective 8 on saving lives and missing migrants is not one of them. It is really important that all of us acknowledge this in our advocacy. Finally, I would like to reiterate that our collective action needs to be guided by the voices and experiences of those directly affected by this tragedy. On Monday, families of Senegalese missing migrants spoke at length about the challenges they encounter, including the often desperate economic situation as a result of having lost a breadwinner. South American migrant shared his desperation at not being able to return the ashes of a deceased co-traveler to their family because consular officials refused to help. A former UN official spoke about coastal communities in Yemen overwhelmed by bodies of drowned migrants washing up on their shore on a daily basis. I would like to commend the network for organizing these occasions, because listening to needs must really be at the heart of our work and guide our efforts to bring about change on the ground and really take it out of conferences rooms. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Florence, and for speaking so eloquently about moving from speaking to acting and to working as one. We're going to turn now to Daniel Meach, who is a technical officer with the Department of Health and Migration at the World Health Organization. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, colleagues. So it is my privilege to address you today and to focus on health consequences of migration. Obviously, I come from WHO, so I will try to respond to the question raised by the moderator from WHO point of view and to outline few areas where WHO can support through its activities the collective efforts of the UN Network on Migration. So first of all, let me just share a few introductory words. So I guess as we gather here, we all recognize the challenges associated with managing the health consequences of migration that have outpaced our current approaches in the modern world. So existing health inequities and barriers to accessing health services only exacerbate these challenges. The interconnected factors of poverty, despair, and lack of employment opportunities contribute to perilous migration flows, exposing individuals to associated health risk. Too often, those in irregular situations find themselves without access to essential health services, enduring deplorable living and working conditions. So in light of these challenges and looking into future, it is imperative that we establish clear priorities and take concerted actions. So let me take now the opportunity to outline few areas where WHO, through its activities, has been supporting the joint efforts within the UN Network on Migration. So first of all, I will start by referring to WHO Constitution, which outlines the enjoyment of highest attainable standard of health as a fundamental right. So what we need to focus on is ensuring fairness and inclusivity through right-based approaches. This requires the protection of migrant rights, especially the right to health, through policy dialogues, through robust policy and legal frameworks. Adopting international standards and promoting equal access to health services for migrants are crucial steps. And moreover, extending or promotion of extending social protections in health is essential for the well-being of migrants. So in this context, obviously, advocacy efforts and advocacy work is of paramount importance. So what we sort of do from WHO point of view we use various tools and instruments to promote the health of migrants. First of all, we use the global events such as World Assembly. The last year we co-organized together with IM and UNHCR the third global consultation on the health of refugees and migrants to promote the rights and health of these populations. Second, we utilize launches of various products, technical products, to advocate for the rights of refugees and migrants, and to raise awareness globally about the needs of these populations. Another important piece of work that we already heard several times is data. So we need to have data to be able to assemble information about migrant health and to be able to inform evidence-based policymaking in the member states. So in this regard, we published in 2022 first world report on the health of refugees and migrants that provides a global overview. And in 2025, we are going to launch two products. So first will be the second world report, again, bringing all the data to provide an updated overview of the situation of the health of refugees and migrants. Second, we are going to launch a global monitoring framework that will enable us to collect the data and monitor progress in implementing the WHO Global Action Plan on promoting the health of refugees and migrants. Hand in hand with data goes research. So, and last year we launched the Global Research Agenda on the health of refugees and migrants. It is this agenda aims to support through evidence or to translate the research into policy and to inform the decision-making and policy-making in the countries. So this year we will work towards translating this global instrument, this global tool into regional and country levels to provide some useful support, useful to member states to progress on the health of refugees and migrants. Third is support to countries to build migrant-sensitive health systems. Basically, what we want to support countries to be able to deliver health services that are culturally and linguistically appropriate, and that will provide access to migrants' access to essential health services. What we do or what we have been doing in this area is providing some capacity building. So WHO organizes on annual basis a global school, which aims to sort of build capacity in the countries, but also to promote evidence-based and informed interventions to ensure the access to health for migrants and as well as also refugees. This school convenes, it's usually 1 week course, and this school convenes a variety of stakeholders stemming from governments, the UN agencies, but also local actors, non-governmental organizations. The last one took place in Senegal, in Africa, and convened about 1,700 participants over 5 days. So we are trying to build impact in the countries. In addition to that, we support countries through country assessments, going to countries, assessing the capacity of their health systems, obviously under the leadership of the Ministry of Health, and trying to identify areas where countries can invest in order to be able to provide the essential health services to migrants. Last issue that I would like to highlight, obviously, is the partnerships as part of the question. So just to coming back to the very basics, WHO acts, its mandate derives from the Global Action Plan on Health of Refugees and Migrants that was adopted in 2019 by the World Assembly. So the conception of the global action plan was very much based on the collective efforts. So many entities, not only member states, but also UN agencies and other stakeholders were invited to provide their inputs and had a chance to influence the document itself, the global action plan. The implementation of the global action plan and the global action plan itself put strong emphasis on collaboration. So we have a strong mandate to collaborate with IOM, with UNHCR, with ILO, member states, non-state actors, really to promote this, the health of migrants and refugees, and to move this agenda forward. And we are grateful to all the partners for the support. And we have had some very good outcomes of the collaboration, being, as I mentioned, the World Report, for instance, where all the agencies contributed, research agenda, but also last year, the third global consultation, a global event convening more than 50 member states and UN agencies and non-state actors, bringing together all those stakeholders to promote the health and access to health for migrants and other vulnerable populations. An outcome of this event was member state negotiated about declaration that further strengthens the commitment on the part of member states to promote the health of refugees and migrants. So I'll stop here and looking forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for that strong emphasis on partnerships and joint efforts, and also for the input around not just the creation of guidance, but also of monitoring frameworks to help ensure that that guidance is implemented. We'll turn now to our final panelist in this session, and that's Benija Goperma, who's the Regional Programme Coordinator from UNODC. Benija, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished guest, good afternoon. Today I represent myself as the Regional Programme Coordinator for UNODC addressing trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants in the Middle East and North Africa. As we all are aware, Middle East and North Africa acts as attractive hubs for irregular migration for refugees and migrants from within the region and from sub-Saharan Africa. People who move across borders in an irregular way, and refugees are exposed to significant, often life-threatening risk along their routes, including the risk of being smuggled or trafficked. In the region, current patterns and trends in forced migration are increasingly driven by conflict, unequal access to natural resources, and difficult living circumstances. According to UNODC's global reports with regards to trafficking flows in North Africa and the Middle East, over 60% of the detected victims are citizens of other countries. Moreover, 42% of the total detected victims originate from conflict-affected countries. Research has shown that conflict settings increase the vulnerability of people to become victims of human trafficking and are most likely to embark on a dangerous journey in search of a better life, a life without war. The UN Secretary General has also stated that for predators and human traffickers, war is not a tragedy, it is an opportunity. This vulnerability is also evident in the profile of victims that are detected globally. Many of those who have been forcibly uprooted, internally displaced, and partially those who remain within their country are without proper protection and aid because of these overlapping underlying factors and an international trend towards tighter immigration and asylum regulations. In terms of smuggling of migrants, the smuggling incidence is still increasing. At least 293,000 people smuggled by sea from Africa to Europe in 2023 alone. Many refugees and migrants have been exploited, abused, or even lost their lives while attempting to reach their destination. traffickers continue to operate with high levels of impunity, placing vulnerable population, including women and children, at a high level of vulnerability of both trafficking, being trafficked and smuggled. As the guardian of the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocol against trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants, UNODC remains committed to prevent and counter organized crime, including trafficking in persons and smuggling of migrants. However, there is still a lot to be done, particularly regarding the protection of the human rights and dignity of migrants on the move and at destination. Still too often, smuggled migrants suffer severe forms of abuse and violence while in their transit. Their perpetrators remain unaccounted for, and for some time, survivors of trafficking and victims of smuggling are often re-victimized during their interaction with the criminal justice system. With this background and in relation to the questions that was shared by the moderator during the beginning of the presentation, I would like to highlight few points that we could together as a network advocate for. As UNODC, we see that strengthened advocacy efforts at national level should encourage government member states to develop or update legislation, policies, and frameworks. Number one, aiming to prevent smuggling and trafficking by prosecuting and punishing offenders, ensuring that it is the actual organized criminal groups that are targeted and not the migrants. Number two, ensure the rights of migrants, including smuggled migrants and the victims of trafficking, are protected in line with the international conventions, international standards, and protocols. Secondly, there is a need for increased awareness and capacity building, increased capacity among relevant national authorities and stakeholders to detect, investigate, prosecute, protect, and adjudicate cases of crimes of trafficking and smuggling. Secondly, to refer and protect the victims of human trafficking. And as the previous panelists have already highlighted, that countering migrant smuggling sometimes has the inclination to lean towards only the criminal justice responses, but the protocol also has a very strong international human rights protection provision, which we always try to reinforce and amplify in our initiatives. We also need to better advocate for the principle of non-punishment of victims of human trafficking, non-criminalization of smuggled migrants, and continue our work on alternate to detention, including alternate to immigration detention. Third, but not least, reliable and impartial evidence analysis and research on migration, smuggling of migrants, and trafficking should enable evidence-based policy making, form the basis for impactful awareness-raising campaigns, and to sensitize the public, including the most vulnerable at the risk of unsafe migration, on the risk of irregular migration. One area that is evidently lacking is the data component, which has been highlighted by the previous panelist. And this is something, as a network, we need to work together, act together, and support member states in developing harmonized data collection efforts and mechanism. In terms of our experience and promising practices, we have identified a set of elements if leverage will enable to strengthenize maximum our impact by supporting and advocating for the protection of human rights and dignity of migrants. In particular, my focus is smuggled migrants and victims of human trafficking. One key aspect is to work with, for, and through youth and children. We have, UNODC recognized that if adequately supported and empowered, youth, including migrants and refugees, can better resist and be more resilient to crime, act as agent of positive change in their communities, especially in the prevention of smuggling of migrants and the protection of smuggled migrants. In 2023, UNODC Regional Office for Middle East and North Africa, together with our Egyptian counterpart, the National Coordination Committee to Address Trafficking and Smuggling, launched a digital awareness raising campaign in Egypt. This campaign mostly focused on the ordeal faced by 3 returnees sharing their journey, their harrowing effects, the ordeal, the abuse that they had to face. This campaign itself reached around 4.3 million people in Egypt. So this is one of the promising practices that we have seen in the region. The second approach that we need to prioritize as network members is the inclusive and people-centered interventions. The voices of victims, survivors are essential to prevent smuggling and trafficking, support victims, and bring perpetrators to justice. Therefore, future advocacy efforts on migrant protection shall focus on efforts to amplifying the voice of migrant as well as those of survivors, victims with lived experiences of crime and smuggling. Besides a promising practice, I would also like to prioritize migrant-led initiatives and advocacy, again, reiterating the need for advocacy on the non-punishment principles of human trafficking, non-criminalization of smuggled migrants, and continue to work on better measures as alternate to detention. Furthermore, in terms of approaches, all of us need to come up with innovation ideas and work with new partners. UNODC proposes to focus on strengthening and building partnership, including with civil society, academia, and the private sector, as long as with other international partners. For instance, we all are aware that civil society stakeholders can play a huge role by engaging with and getting the attention and support to amending or developing legislations and policies as well. They are the first responders of any incident or event that happens at the community level. So the engagement of civil society is crucial when we work in the area of responding to trafficking and smuggling of migrants. These are, in a nutshell, some of the ways that UNODCs have identified and will focus on to increase advocacy on the rights and protection of migrants. As UNODC, we continue to look ahead to coordinated and successful action towards reaching the Compact's objective in close cooperation with all partners and UN agencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benida, for those comments, for the comments early on as well, particularly around situations that create vulnerability, and also for, again, that strong emphasis on partnership, which I think is a thread that's run throughout the last couple of days. We have really limited time, as you will not be surprised here, and I am very mindful of both your lunch break and Jonathan's blood pressure, which he spoke about yesterday. So we will try and move swiftly through the next part. Again, there will not be time to hear from everybody in the room who has something to contribute. So there will be a Slido again. The QR code will go up in a moment. So please, if you can give just 1 or 2 words on what the network can do to better support stakeholders to address the key challenges, particularly thinking about those key challenges that were raised in the previous panel. And then we will turn to our list of speakers from the floor, starting with the representative of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Mediterranean. You have the floor.
Madame Townhead, chers collègues du réseau des Nations Unies pour les migrations, c'est un honneur pour moi que de prendre la parole aujourd'hui au nom de l'Assemblée parlementaire de la Méditerranée qui entretient d'excellentes relations avec ONU Migration et son réseau. Tout d'abord, un grand merci aux membres du panel. Notre région, la Méditerranée, est en proie à des défis multiples, qu'il s'agisse de la guerre menée par la Russie contre l'Ukraine, des catastrophes naturelles qui ont frappé nombre de nos pays et dont la récurrence ne saurait qu'augmenter avec l'impact du changement climatique, ou encore des conflits qui ébranlent actuellement sa frange orientale, notamment à Gaza. Ces bouleversements obligent toujours plus de personnes à fuir leur foyer, leur pays, leur vie, dans l'espoir d'un avenir meilleur. S'il est certain que ces mouvements migratoires représentent des défis interconnectés pour chacun de nos pays, cela ne doit se faire au détriment ni de la sécurité humanitaire, ni de la dignité humaine. Face à l'essor de la traite d'êtres humains qui s'est largement développée ces dernières années, les trafiquants et les passeurs devenant plus organisés, il est de notre responsabilité en tant que politique de faire preuve de leadership dans la recherche de solutions durables et efficaces. Tous les pays de la région euro-méditerranéenne sont soit des pays d'origine, de transit ou de destination. Parfois, ils sont à la fois pays de transit et de destination. Dans ce contexte, notre Assemblée travaille activement sur le lancement d'une campagne de communication sur la lutte contre la traite et le trafic de migrants. L'Assemblée parlementaire de la Méditerranée promeut également une collaboration solide et un soutien entre les acteurs tant au niveau national que transnational dans l'édiction de dispositions légales aptes à agir concrètement pour déboucher sur des poursuites et condamnations. La dignité des migrants doit être respectée dans tous les pays qu'ils traversent ou où ils demandent l'asile. Nous devons travailler conjointement pour créer un cadre législatif régional promouvant la coopération, la solidarité et le partage des responsabilités face aux défis humains et sociaux que représentent les mouvements migratoires contemporains. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Thank you very much, and for the comments that again echo the importance that we've heard throughout several interventions around regional focus and around collaboration. I'm now going to give the floor to the representative of Mexico.
Thank you very much, Laurel, and thank you to all the panelists. Mexico is honored to deliver this statement on behalf of the GFMD GCM rapporteur team. I take the opportunity to thank the French chairmanship for entrusting us with this responsibility. During the 3 days GFMD summit, we heard a number of challenges that threaten migrant safety and dignity and the enjoyment of human rights. This includes factors that compel people to leave their countries of origin, like climate change, risks that migrants encounter in transit, especially when using irregular channels, as well as barriers that migrants experience in destination countries in areas such as access to services, protection of labor rights, and vis-a-vis an increasingly hostile public narrative. Some of these challenges, of course, have a differentiated impact on the most vulnerable. Participants recognize that in order to maximize the contributions of migrants to development, migration policies and practices must put migrants at the center and ensure that all migrants without discrimination can enjoy their human rights. This vision is embedded in the GCM, a framework fully anchored in international human rights law that champions the people-centered, human rights-based, gender-responsive, and child-sensitive approaches as cross-cutting guiding principles. A number of good practices were also shared at the summit aimed at protecting migrants' rights and saving lives. For example, consistent with Objective 5 and 7 of the GCM, various countries, including Colombia, Ecuador, Thailand, Argentina, and Spain, have implemented regularization programs and other forms of legal stay for vulnerable migrants and persons displaced by disasters, an effective tool to protect rights. In line with Objective 1 and 17, Canada and other countries have put in place initiatives to promote balanced migration narratives, to dispel myths and showcase the positive contributions of migrants to development, an effort that prevents and addresses xenophobia, racial discrimination, and hate speech. During the pandemic, a number of countries such as Portugal, El Salvador, and Egypt included all migrants without discrimination in COVID response plans in order to uphold migrants' right to health. This, of course, reflects Objectives 7 and 15 of the GCM. In looking forward, various participants recommended strengthening the dialogue and collaboration between countries of origin, transit, and destination, recognizing the need to protect migrants' rights under a whole-of-route approach. Also highlighted the critical role of partnerships between all actors of society in protecting rights and saving lives, reflective of the whole-of-society approach that is necessary to manage migration. These elements constitute a rough summary of some of the key issues discussed at the 14th GFMD Summit, which we hope to elaborate further in the upcoming written report. We trust that these elements will be useful to inform this year's regional reviews of the GCM and also prepare the groundwork for the second IMRF in 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorge, and for bringing those reflections and thinking about the coherence between different spaces where similar issues are being discussed. Thank you very much. We're going to ask the rest of our speakers to speak as briefly as possible. So really 1 minute if you can. And to put you on notice for that, we're going to take first the International Migration Research Center, then the representative of Turkey, and then the representative from the Platform on Disaster Displacement. So those of you who aren't speaking immediately, please try and work out how to cut your notes down to something shorter. But first, the floor is yours, Jenna.
Hi, thank you very much. So I'm Jenna Hennebree. I'm with the International Migration Research Center and founder of the Gender Plus Migration Hub. I also co-chair the gender work stream of the network with UN Women. You know, we've heard over the last couple of days a number of situations where we've seen that the immense risks that migrants encounter and how these risks are uneven. For women migrants, we know GBV is particularly prevalent, for example. It's not enough that we just recognize these problems, but we also need to respond to them by actually operationalizing the guiding principle of gender responsiveness so we can transform the system that's producing these conditions. Because it is governing practices, tied work permits, detention, closed pathways, lack of access to regularization that produce or heighten situations of vulnerability for women and gender diverse migrants. Which is why it's not enough to merely recognize them or even to recognize the handful of good practices we've heard here today and yesterday. We need to more meaningfully realize gender responsiveness. And so I'm going to say 3 quick actions that I think are important that can be taken by states and stakeholders. First, we must operationalize at a system level, not merely a bunch of one-off practices that might recognize the gender dimensions of migration. We've seen that there's been very few MPTF funded projects focused on gender responsive implementation. So I'll echo the call of UK colleagues, representative from the UK, highlighting the need for that. Second, we need to measure progress on gender responsiveness. And here I want to highlight the work of the indicators work stream, which has included SDG indicators such as 5.1.1 on legal frameworks in place to enforce and monitor equality and non-discrimination, for example, on violence, as well as on 10.7.2 government introducing formal mechanisms to ensure migration policy is gender responsive. So pay attention to those indicators and use them because what measured gets done. And lastly, the gender work stream has indicated and developed the GRIT training, which will be rolled out in the next quarter. And it's important to build capacities in order to actually operationalize.
Thank you, Jenna.
Change.
We know there's a lot more to say, but we really do want to hear a couple
Thanks.
more speakers from the room, and we know we're at time. So I'm now going to give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Thank you very much, Laura. At the outset, thank you for the intervention made by Mexico on behalf of GFMD and the GCM drafting group. But I would like to add also Türkiye name to those countries who conducting inclusive migration policy. Türkiye during the COVID-19 response, as well as during the earthquake response. So we conducted inclusive manner policy. And I will be brief. My question is about data sharing in framework of UN protocols, because it's an important aspect. If we want to efficiently fight against migrant smuggling, human trafficking, the states should share data efficiently But what we are seeing under the protocol, there is no specific and detailed data protection and data sharing article. Some countries or some regional groups, they use this excuse for not sharing the data for combating against migrant smuggling. And this is the big issue, we believe that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with apologies to everyone else, we're going to take one last intervention, and that's from the Platform on Disaster Displacement, with a request to please be brief so we don't stand between people and their lunch.
Thank you for convening this important discussion and raising a number of cross-cutting themes. I represent the Platform on Disaster Displacement. I cut the rest of my introduction. I wanted to circle back to the issue of complementarity, which was a focus in the earlier session we had today. There are a few areas where the importance of applying a coherent approach to policy challenges are so pronounced as climate change and human mobility, reinforcing the need for complementary implementation of the GCR and the GCM. For example, the GCR recognizes that those forcibly displaced across borders in disaster contexts have protection needs that may be addressed by measures such as temporary protection and humanitarian stay arrangements. These are measures that are explicitly listed in both the GCM and the GCR, something that Mexico also just alluded to. However, the use of existing protection tools is often random and hard to predict. We recommend, therefore, to build on existing good practice to develop specific guidance on the application of refugee law and complementary or temporary protection measures to disaster and climate change related mobility. To this end, if I may, to conclude, I want to point you to a paper published at the Global Refugee Forum jointly between PDD and UNHCR on the protection of persons displaced across borders in the context of disasters and the adverse effects of climate change, which you can access online and should ideally read in conjunction with the network's guidance note on regular pathways for persons in situations of vulnerability. I thank you.
Thank you very much for the substantive and brief input there. So I'm just going to say we don't have time to come back down the line for our panelists, but to thank all of our panelists, to thank you for your engagement, to acknowledge that there are others in the room who would have liked to have spoken. There are probably others online who are interested in contributing to this really key and important discussion around saving lives and around upholding human rights of migrants. And just in closing, I'd like to say there are hard things that we hear when we have these conversations, things which are distressing and things which are frustrating. And it reminds me when I hear every one of these stories, every one of these statistics of a question from the British journalist Daniel Trilling. And he says, people develop attachments to places, they move, they develop attachments to new places and to new people. If you think people have a right to do that, then the question is how to support it. If you don't, then you need to ask yourself, what level of violence are you prepared to tolerate to keep people in their place? And both of those questions in that quote are reminders of agency. We do not all have the same level of power or influence, but everybody in this room has some power and some influence over what we've been discussing. So how can we stop admiring the problem of political will and move into addressing it? I think there's 4 ways that have come out across the last 2 days and really strongly this morning. That's through collectivities, through coherence, through convening, and through courage. On collectivities, that's coming together, working together under the big umbrella of the network, but also in smaller groupings within that, the work streams, the country networks, the MPTF projects, and along routes as has been spoken about. In terms of coherence, that's about complementarity and about benefiting from that comparative advantage that Florence just mentioned. In convening, that's about bringing people together in rooms to have the conversations that need to be had. That includes the conversations that are currently happening and recognizing those that aren't and which we need. Throughout the 2 days, we've heard more about being more in conversation with migrants to draw on their expertise and experience. And I think we also need to think about what convening do we need to engage with political will. And this is something people have heard me said before, but we need to think about how do we engage with political will to make those actionable recommendations we're going to have on missing migrants and saving lives and humanitarian assistance. How do we actually action those? Who do we need to be able to convene the conversations at the level that can bring together, as you were talking about, for example, head of state for regional head of state commitments on that? Do we need a group of eminent experts or a high-level panel to be able to convene that? And finally, on courage, for not just changing small things here and there, but I think we've heard a call across the last 2 days for transformation. So that would be where I would finish. My hope is that on political will is that we do keep coming together. We do keep having these commitments. We do keep having these statements from member states. And so we need to build on what we've been given, those tools we've got, and the expertise and commitment that we have in this room and amongst others who are associated with it. Thank you very much for your time. Apologies for overrunning. We hope you enjoy your lunch break. Thank you all.